Hey guys, this is Allie with iMore, and this is our complete reassembly video from the screen down for the iPhone 4S. All carriers, does not matter, Canada, Europe, United States, does not matter. All the versions are the same. If you're performing a mod from our website, the mod should have had the time at which you need to start. So if you're doing a speaker assembly, those will have all the information you need upon what time in the video you need to start to complete reassembly. If you are performing a screen swap, you'll need to start right here. If you have not performed a mod yet, you can find all of our tutorials at imore.com/category/weekly-mod. Okay, so what we're going to do for the 4S, once you have already put your speaker mesh and your camera hold back on if you're doing a screen replacement and your home button, we're ready to start reassembly. So the first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to put these cables through the top and make sure they don't get pinched. And I'll show you what I mean. This digitizer cable can get bound up in here. So what you're going to want to do is make sure it goes all the way through. And the way you know if it's all the way through is if when you have these two little clips in the top lined up, these two cables should be the exact same length. If they're not, and this one is shorter, it's pinched up somewhere in here, so remove it and make sure you get it all the way through. So what we're going to do is we're going to just line up the clips on all the edges, and you might have to push them in a little bit. Okay, so now that all of them are lined up, we're going to push the face down. And you can see around the edges you want it to be completely flush. The screws in here that you loosened, you're going to want to make sure that the clips are underneath the washers and the screw, so they're not in between. Sometimes they do that. So once you have this completely lined up, you can lay it flat down, and you can use your 00 Phillips screwdriver to tighten the 6 screws, 3 on each side, that contain the washers. Okay. And the 3 along this side. Okay. Now at this point what you want to do, test your home button. Make sure you can hear it clicking and that it's pushing down correctly. And now we can move on to the 4 corner screws, which are 1, 2, 3, 4. And we're going to replace those. Like I said, I keep the tape on this first one. It's up to you. You can remove it and unscrew it. So we're going to come up in this corner and replace this screw. And that tape lines up. And then we're going to come up in this top corner. And this one is the tricky one, the one that's up here in this corner, the right-hand corner. You just kind of have to get an angle on there to get it in correctly. Okay, and then the 2 screws in the bottom. Okay. And now that the 4 screws are in, we are going to replace the vibrator assembly. This should sit, there's a little cavity right here that a screw will be placed in, and you have a little piece on your vibrator assembly that sits right over that. And then the bottom portion of the vibrator assembly should almost sit flush aligned with the bottom where the speaker assembly sits. So just push down on that with a little bit of pressure, make sure it's on there good. Now we're going to move along to the speaker assembly. There are 4 teeth right here that should sit below this frame. So all I'm going to do is seat this in here and use my pry tool to make sure that these are all pushed underneath there so it's sitting flush in the frame. Once it is, I'm going to hold it with one hand. I'm going to replace the right side screw. And now we have this little black retainer piece And we're going to place that spacer right back where it goes and replace the screw that holds that down. Okay. Now if you're replacing the screen, these cables up here for your LCD and digitizer can be a little bit stiff, so you might want to bend them down with your finger. It's a lot easier when you're replacing the logic board, which is what we're going to be replacing next. Again, make sure this little black grounding piece is sitting there. The easiest way to do this, make sure that this antenna cable is out of the way. What I do is I hold these cables up right here, and remember there's a smaller one underneath. It's very easy to get that one lodged underneath the logic board. And I know it's kind of hard to see this, but you just slide the logic board back into place and make sure that no cables are covered. And then it'll sit right down like that. And here's a cheat way to know that the logic board's in correctly. You couldn't do this on the CDMA4, but you could on the GSM and any 4S. Put your SIM card back in. And if it slides in easily, like so, the logic board's in place, and that will also hold the logic board down while you're screwing it back into place. So that's an easy way to put the logic board in. So we're going to start with the 2 flathead screws or crosshair screws with our flathead screwdriver. The first one goes up here in the top. And again, I hope you organized your screws so you know where all of them are coming from. And when you're putting screws back in, don't tighten them to the point where they're too tight because you can strip them. So you just want them to be snug. Next we're going to move to the last crosshair screw that goes down by where the battery sits. And we're going to screw that one back in place. These can be a little tricky. Sometimes they don't want to go in. You might have to try a couple times. I've just done this so many times that you just get used to them. Now we're going to move to the 3 screws that are located here, here, and here. So we're going to start in the bottom left-hand corner with our 00 Phillips screwdriver. And we're going to replace this bottom screw down here. Okay. Next, we're going to move to the middle screw. It holds down the middle of the logic board. And we're going to screw that one down. Okay, and if you remember from disassembly, there's a little gold grounding clip that sits underneath this top screw. So I'm going to place it in here over the screw hole and push it into place with my pry tool. And I know this is hard to see. You'll just see that there's a screw hole that lines up with that. So once you get it up there, you should be able to grab your screw and hold it down. So now I'm just going to screw this in place. And there was a piece of tape that sat over this screw. So the next thing we're going to do is take the piece of tape. Let me peel it off my table here. The easiest way I found to do this is I stick it to my pry tool, set it in here, and push it down. And that'll cover that up. So now that we have that in place, our logic board is secured. Next, we are going to move on to snapping down some cables. So the easiest place to start is at the bottom. We're going to start, and this cable, I'm going to try to do this so you can see it. It winds around this screw, and then back down through here, and it snaps right in place over this circular connector. So, and you'll feel it snap down under your finger. So once that's in place, now we can line up the dot connector cable. I'll hold this up so you can see. And you'll feel that click into place. And you can push your finger down over this adhesive so that stays down. And now we're going to move up to here. We can replace our rear-facing camera, which sits right here, and snap that cable down, make sure that's flush. We can snap this underneath cable down right here. Remember, that one lies underneath that cable. So now that that one's on, snap this one next to it down, and the top one. And now on a new screen, this digitizer cable might be pretty stiff, so just kind of put a little fold in it towards the top, and then smack it down onto the logic board. Same thing with the digitizer cable. Okay, there's those two, and then our antenna cable is another circular type cable, and you're just going to line that up. And sometimes it's easier to hold them to where you can see the sides, so you can see how they're lined up, and snap that one down. Okay, so now that all of our cables are back on the logic board, we can go ahead and start replacing shields. I'll start with the shield up here on the top, and we can replace this shield. There's little teeth that sit right in here on the logic board, and there's another little tooth right here that goes underneath this cable, and it'll slide underneath the logic board a little bit. So what we're going to do, let's get that guy in there. He's down flat. I'm going to hold this down with one hand, line up the screw holes, and use my 00 Phillips screwdriver to start replacing the screws in here. I always start with the top one. You can start with whichever one you feel more comfortable with. Just found that the top one and the far left hold the whole shield down so you can get the tiny screws in place. Okay, there's that guy. And now we can replace this screw to the far left. Okay. And if your screws aren't going in, make sure you're not forcing them in somewhere they shouldn't be. Some of these sit on top of screw holds on the logic board, so you don't want to force them and break something off the logic board. So just be careful when you're replacing them. And again, don't do them too tight or you'll strip those screws. They're tiny. Alright, now that that shield's on, we can move on to this shield that sits to the right of that. You can see there is a screw hole in it. It goes down like this. Sits right in place like that. And there's one screw that you can screw in with your 00. Everything minus your dot connector screws that go on the bottom and the two crosshair screws in the logic board will use a 00 screwdriver. Next, we've got one more shield, which is our shield that goes over our logic board. And we can go ahead and replace the two screws that sit on either side of that. Alright, so we line this up right along the dot connector, and we're going to replace the two screws that sit on either side. Just to make sure it's lined up, I don't tighten either of them all the way until I have them both in there. Alright. Okay, now all we have left to do is replace the battery. So I fold this tab over when I'm disassembling because it gets it out of the way. So if you did that, go ahead and flip it back over. Remember this little guy, little grounding clip that we had? That sits right underneath where that top screw goes in with the gold piece down. So let me position this and then you can see how that's done. Sits right like that. So once you have that on there, you can snap your battery connector down over it. And this just snaps right in place. And lay your battery down. Put a little bit of pressure on it so the adhesive sticks. And then we're going to replace the top screw first. And I typically put my other finger over this little gold piece so that holds in place as I'm turning the screw. Okay. And the bottom battery screw. Alright, now we can replace the back plate. Just as we slid it up, we'll slide it back down to put it back on. See a little break right here? Just slide it in place. That's back on. You can tell if the camera is lined up that it's all the way on. So once it's on, use your security screwdriver to replace the 2 dot connector screws on either side of the charge port. And these are the same size. Again, with the security screws, it's really important that you don't tighten them too much. You will strip them and you will not get them back out. So make sure you don't tighten them too much. So now that that's in there, you can go ahead and power up your phone. And if all went well, your phone should power up and whatever was broken should now be fixed.